When the first snow commenced to fall, she was always full of glee, standing on a rock, screaming like a wind gale. 4-8, he took flat pieces of wood and began cutting out figures like little men. 176. Soon, to his astonishment, he saw close at hand a beautiful city. 194. Down in Honduras, there is a town called Pueblo de Chamelecon, which is not much of a town after all. There is only one street in it, and the houses are like big beehives that have been squared up, and the roofs are of straw. There is no sidewalk, no roadway, and the houses are unfenced, so that you step from the room into the sandy street and, because of the heat, when you are inside you wish that you were out, and when you are outside you wish that you were in. So the children of the place spend much time down at the little river. At least they did when I was there. I rode there on a donkey and, the day being hot, let the animal graze, or sleep, or think, or dream, or work out problems, or whatever it is that a donkey does with his spare time, and I watched the children in the water. There was one, a little baby just able to toddle around, who crawled down to the water's edge, rolled in, and swam about like a little dog, much as the babies of Tierra del Fuego will swim in the icy waters of the far south. He came out on my side of the water, as lively as a grig, smiling every bit as friendly as any other little chap of his age, white, brown, or yellow. I stayed there that night because the day did not get cool, and in the evening the people sat outside of their houses and played the guitar and sang. Now I had with me a little musical instrument like a tiny organ which I bought in France, and it was so compact and handy that I could carry it everywhere as easily as I could a blanket. In fact, I used to ride with it behind my saddle, wrapped in my bedding. Well, as the people seemed to like their music, I brought out mine, so we had a very jolly concert, in spite of my poor voice, which they politely pretended not to notice. Then later, from curiosity, the children came about me, and, to amuse them as well as myself, having done so badly at the singing, I did a few tricks with wads of rolled paper and a couple of tin cups, and the little boy who had swum across the pond laughed as loudly as anyone there. That pleased his father mightily, so much indeed that he brought me a cup of goat's milk and some cassava bread and told me that I was a fine fellow. To please me further, he sang a very, very long song. It was all about the parrot and the wonderful things it did, a parrot that had lived long among people and learned their songs, and when the bird flew back to the forest it still sang, and so well that all the other parrots in the forest learned to sing the song from beginning to end. But what was curious was that at the end of every other verse there was this line, when the rat had a tail like a horse. So when he had done, I asked him about that, for all the rats I had seen had tails which were far from beautiful, according to my notion. The man listened gravely, then said, "But certainly, once the rat had a tail like a horse." "When was that?" I asked. "When the rabbit had a tail like a cat," he said. "But I am still puzzled," I told him. "Was it long ago?" "It was when the deer's tail was plumed like the tail of a dog," he told me. As we talked, a kind of polite silence was upon all the people gathered about us. Then a very, very old woman who was smoking a cigar nodded her head and said, "But Tio Ravenna is right. It was in the days of Hun bats who lived on beetles and spiders, and I heard it from my mother's mother, and she from the mother of her mother." Then the old woman went on smoking with her eyes closed, and all who were there nodded at one another, thinking, I suppose, that the old grandmother would presently tell the story. But of course, they who knew her well were wiser than to ask her to tell the tale of 3 tails, so everyone waited. Presently a little girl gave the old grandmother a piece of sugar and asked, "Was it 2 brothers or 3 who had to clear the great forest?" "I am not sure." At that, the little old lady's eyes were bright, and she threw away her cigar and said, "2 brothers, that I have told you before." After a little sigh, which was only pretending that she was weary of telling the tale, she said, "You know that I have told it to you before, and it is wrong that I should have to tell it so often. But you see this." So saying, she took from her bosom, where she had it fastened to a silk thread, a little piece of jade, and let us see it. It was broken from a larger piece, but we could make out on it a carving which I saw to be a deer with a tail like a sheepdog's. We passed it about, and everyone looked at it carefully, although certainly all of them must have seen it time and time again. And when it came to the old grandmother again, she replaced it and told us the tale of 3 tales, just as I have written it here. George. Once, long ago, the rat had a beautiful tail like a horse, with long, sweeping hairs, though it was before my time of life. It was in the days of old Hunbats, and he was a wizard who lived in the dark of the great forest that used to be on the other side of the big river. In those days, things were not as now, and animals were different, some larger, some smaller. The deer, as you have seen on the stone I showed you, had a tail like a dog, and the rabbit's tail was long and furry like the tail of a cat. Now in that land there was a hunter with whom neither lasso nor arrow ever failed, and he had 2 sons, beautiful to look at and brave of heart, stout and quick of foot. Not only did the brothers work better than any men had ever worked, but they could play ball and sing, throwing the ball higher than birds could fly, and singing in a way that brought the wild things to hear them. Nor was there living creature able to run as swiftly as the 2 brothers. The birds alone could outrace them. The brothers being grown, their father thought that it was time for them to make a home for themselves, so chose a place on the farther side of the forest, and told them to clear it, which, he said, could be done in 7 days. It was no little forest, you must remember, but a vast place where sunlight never pierced, and the roots of trees were like great ropes, a jungle that stretched for miles and miles, and the tangle in it was so thick that a monkey could barely get through without squeezing. Deep in the forest there was a blackness like the blackness of night. The trunks of the trees were so large that 3 men holding hands could not circle them, and where there were no trees there were vines and snake-like lianas and thorn bushes and flowers so great that a man could lie down to sleep in the shade of them. The first day the brothers took a great space, piling the trees at one corner, clearing the tangle, and leaving all as smooth as the water of a lake. They sang as they worked, and they sang as they rested in the heat of the day, and the organ bird and the flute bird answered them from the gold-green shade. So pleasant was their music that the old iguana, though he was as big as a man, came from his resting place in the trees to listen. Seeing how things were going, old Hunbats in the dark of the forest grew very angry, fearing that his hiding place would soon dwindle and vanish. So he went to the great gray owl, his friend, and they talked the matter over between them. The owl told Hunbats that he must set the father's heart against the brothers, telling him that the boys were lazy and instead of working spent their time in playing with the ball and in singing. "Go," said the owl to their father, "and when he asks how the lads fare with their work, say to him they sing and they play for half of the day. It may fall out that he will grow angry and cut off their heads, and thus the forest will be safe for us." That seemed to the wizard to be good advice, and before the close of the day's work old Hunbats, who could fly by flapping his hands in a certain way like a swimmer, cast himself into the air and flew with great swiftness to the place where the father lived. But he took care to dress himself like a woodman. "Well met," said the father, seeing Hunbats, but thinking him no wizard, of course. "From where do you come?" "From the other side of the forest," was the reply. "Then perchance you saw my 2 sons who are clearing the forest," said the father. "I did," said Hunbats. "And how are the boys doing?" asked the father. At that old Hunbats shook his head sadly and answered, as the owl had told him, "They sing and they play for half of the day." That, you know, was quite untrue, for while they sang there was no stopping of work, and as for the play, it is true that they threw the ball from one to the other, but so clever were they that one would throw the ball so high that it would take hours and hours before it came down again, and of course while it was in the air the brothers went on working. "I would cut off their heads to teach them a lesson," said Hunbats, "if they were sons of mine." Then he turned on his heel and went away, not flying until he was out of the father's sight, for he did not wish any man to know that he was a wizard. To be sure, the good man was grieved and his face clouded when he heard the tale of Hunbats, but he said nothing, and, a short time after, the brothers came home. He was much surprised when, asking the lads how much work they had done that day, they told him that they had cleared off the space of forest he had bidden them to. After much thought, he told them that the next day they would have to do twice as much as before. The brothers thought the new task hard, but they went to work with a good will, and on the second day the trees fell like corn before a man with a machete, and before night they had finished that which they had been given to do. Again old Hunbats flew through the air to the father and tried to set him against the boys, and again that night, when the boys were home, their task was set for the next day twice as much as the day before. It was the same the third day and the fourth, until at last the boys came to a point where by the mightiest working they could not move a stick or a blade of grass more, and yet, because of old Hunbats, the father set them a task still greater. On the fifth day things looked very hopeless for the boys, and their hearts were sad as they looked at the forest and saw the task that their father had set them to do. They went to work feeling for the first time it would be impossible for the sun to go down on their finished task, and the heart of old Hunbats was glad. But the birds in the forest were silent that morning, for they too knew that there were sad hearts in the brothers. Even the grasshoppers and the mosquitoes and the bees were still, and as for the boys, not a note of joy could they raise. Then to them came the iguana, wise old lizard, who knew everything that went on in the forest, and as soon as he had heard what the brothers had to say, he smiled and called on them to listen, after making sure that there was no living creature to hear except the birds, for of them he had no fear, knowing that the birds tell no secrets. "Be cheerful," said the iguana, "and I will tell you a charm. It is this, mark, about the handles of your working tools, rings of black, white, red, and green, and before you start to work, sing 'I must do what I can' is the thought of a man. And if your hearts are brave, you will see what happens." Having said this and smiled on the brothers, the old iguana climbed into a tree and stretched himself along the branch of it where he could best see, and the birds gathered in a great circle, a matchless melody going up to the sky. So the brothers took their axes, their spades, their hoes, and their machetes, and painted about the handles of them rings of black and of white and of red and of green, and their voices rang sweet and clear as they sang, as the iguana had told them. "I must do what I can" is the thought of a man. No sooner had the last words passed than the whole company of birds broke out into a chorus, singing, chattering, chirping, whistling, screaming, each according to its manner, and, without hands touching them, axes went to work cutting down trees, machetes chopped at lianas and vines, spades cleared and dug, and trees, bushes, and weeds piled themselves in great heaps at the edge of the clearing, so that in less than an hour the whole task was done. Then it was that all things in the forest were glad, and the good iguana smiled broadly. The very monkeys joined in and, catching the ball which the brothers threw, tossed it from tree to tree until it passed through the whole jungle and back again. But old Hunbats was angry beyond measure, so angry that he whirled about on his heels 300 times, turning so rapidly that he looked like a storm cloud, and his long whiskers were tangled about him like a mantle. But the faster he whirled, the more his anger boiled, and, flapping his hands, he shot into the air, going so swiftly that his very clothes were scorched. "How are the boys?" asked the father when Hunbat stood before him. For answer, Hunbat screamed, "Your boys are idle fellows. They sing and they play for half of the day." "Had I such sons, I would cut their heads off to teach them a lesson," said the father. "Tomorrow I shall go to the forest, and if you have not spoken truth, then this arrow, which has never yet missed a mark, shall find one in your heart. But if it is as you say, then my sons shall feel my anger." Old Hunbat did not like that at all, for well he knew that the hunter's arrows were never wasted. So back he flew to the owl, and the two of them whispered together. That night there was a great gathering of the animals, of the hare, the deer, the rat, the jaguar, the puma, the opossum, and many others. The rat, the deer, and the rabbit led them, and in a wonderfully short time, not only were all things restored and the work of the day undone, but the trees and the bushes and the vines and the lianas that had been moved on the other days were put back in their old places, growing and blooming, so that all was as though the brothers had never been at the forest at all. Sad was the hour the next morning when the hunter came with his two sons and saw the forest as though hand had never touched it. The brothers could not believe their eyes. Grinning from the thick of a rubber tree was the face of Hunbats, and on his shoulder was the owl. For a moment the father thought to cut off the heads of the lads to teach them a lesson, but on second thought he told them that he would give them another chance. "What should have been done is not done," he said. "I will grant you a day and a night to clear all the forest as you told me it was cleared. Tomorrow morning I will come again, and see whether all is well done." At that he left them and went his way. No sooner had he gone than the two brothers went to see the iguana, who told them of the witchery of the owl and Hunbats, and bade them to act as before. So they made the ring about the handles of their working tools once more, and sang, "I must do what I can is the thought of a man." And, as on the day before, axes, machetes, and spades went to work, and in a short time all was clear again. Then the iguana told the brothers of the evil that Hunbats had done, and bade them set traps and keep watch that night. So 3 traps were made and set, and when night fell, from all parts of the forest there came animals led by the rat, the deer, and the rabbit, and old Hunbats and the owl watched from the dark caves of the leaves. No sooner had the first 3 animals stepped into the clearing than they were caught fast in the traps, whereupon the rest of the animals turned and fled. Then the brothers rushed to the traps. The rabbit gave a great jump when he felt the jaws close upon his beautiful cat-like tail, but it was chopped off close to the body. The deer, with his tail like a plume, fared no better. So both deer and rabbit fled to the woods, ashamed, and, as you see for yourself, have had no tails ever since. As for the rat, he was far too wise to jump as the rabbit and deer had done, but seeing the brothers coming, he pulled and pulled and pulled so that all the beautiful hair was stripped, leaving him with but a bare and ugly thing of a tail as you see today. The next morning when the hunter father came, there was the forest cleared, and all in good order as the boys had said. So he sought out old Hunbats, who flapped his hands and flew for very fear. But so fast he went that his clothes were burnt off, and his skin was baked into a hard crust by the great heat, and he fell to the earth and so became what we call an armadillo. As for the 2 brothers, they lived very happily for many, many years, and things went well with them, and the land they lived in was a land of good harvest and fruit trees. So now you know the tale of 3 tails, and if you do not believe it, look at the rat and the deer and the rabbit and the armadillo, and see for yourself. The magic dog. Down where the forest is so thick that the sun rarely pierces the leafy roof, where there are mosses and ferns and little plants of the brightest green, where parrots screech and thousands of little monkeys chatter in the trees, there stands a great white temple. Once long ago there was joy and gladness there, and flower-crowned people danced and sang, but now vines hang about the doors and window-holes, and there are tall rank weeds in the courtyard. Still, it is even now very beautiful, though sad to see. Long years before this temple was built, there lived a king, and his people loved him, and he, on his part, loved not only his people, but every flower that grew, every grass blade, and every leaf on bush and tree. Where he came from none knew, but there were those who said that he had come from the sea, not in a ship with men, but alone, in a great and beautiful seashell. So they called him in their own tongue, the king who came in a seashell. And when he went about among his people, he wore a headdress of gold-green feathers, a feather cloak of turquoise blue, and about his middle was a golden belt set with glittering precious stones. On his feet were golden sandals, and in his hand he bore a great spear of silver. The spear he carried for a sign only, for there was no fighting in those days, and it was a time when all went very well. Everyone had enough to eat and to drink and to wear, so that none had to worry about the day to come. Men loved diamonds and emeralds and rubies for their beauty, and just as they loved the sight of the tiny rainbow in a sparkling dewdrop. As for other things, corn grew so large that a single ear was as much as a man could carry, and cotton grew not only white, as we see it now, but red and blue and yellow and scarlet and black and orange and violet and green. It was the daughter of the seashell king who had taught the people how to grow colored cotton, and she, with her silky cloud of hair, was the most beautiful creature ever seen. When she walked about, the air was sweet with wonderful perfume. Birds sang with joy as though their throats would burst, and slim drooping ferns nodded a welcome. The story of the beauty and goodness of the maiden ran through all the land, and young men who sought her hand came from far and wide. So many were her suitors that a day was set apart each week, when all the people gathered to see the young men display their powers or their gifts or their clevernesses. Some would shoot with the bow, and others cast the lasso. Singers sang the songs they had made, and musicians played their flutes so well that the slender boughs bent to listen. There were gifts, too, and some brought rare stones cut into the shapes of birds and animals and flowers. But not one man had touched the heart of the princess, though she was gracious to all. Now before the king came, an evil creature of a witch had ruled the land, and she had come from the land of the shaking mud. Somehow the seashell king had driven her away, and, that she should worry his people no more, he had set a boundary, and guards were on watch day and night to prevent her in her mischief. So she spent the day in her cave, coming out only at night to prowl about the boundary, and then only when there was no moon. Her name was Tlapa. One day there came to the king a man in rags who said that his name was Makanahola, and the king was glad to see him, the more so because age was creeping upon the king, and he sought someone wise and brave enough to rule in his place. But no sooner had the princess looked at the stranger than she cast down her eyes, saying that he had the face of the man she had seen in a dream. When the king asked her questions, she said that in her dream she had followed the stranger about, had slept at his feet, had tended his fields, and made his clothes. At that her father was greatly astonished, for that his daughter should be the servant of a man who came clad in rags seemed strange indeed. The second day Makanahola was asked if he bore gifts, but he showed his empty hands. Then, to the end that no idle or useless man should be in that land, a time was set, and Makanahola was ordered to appear before the young men and compete with them. At the test, Makanahola stood very well. When the best bowman sent his arrow into the exact center of the mark, Makanahola drew his bow and aimed so carefully that his arrow split the arrow of the other man. Nor was he less skillful with the lasso, casting his loop so that it fell about the smallest thing aimed at. It was much the same when the swiftest runner was brought. To be sure, he ran like a deer, but Makanahola ran like the wind, leaving him far behind. As for the singing contest, when the stranger sang, the very birds were hushed, and, the song being finished, a great quetzal with jet-black wings, a scarlet breast, and head and back of gold-green feathers flew down and sat on the shoulder of Makanahola. Then a great shout went up, and all the bowmen, the lasso-throwers, the runners, and the singers came forward and greeted Makanahola, for there was no jealousy in that land, nor was there envy, and each had it in his mind to strive for that which seemed best, caring nothing for self-advancement. As for the king, being very old and tired, he was glad indeed to find a man who might become ruler in his place. So he stepped down from his high place and cast his coat made of 1,000 turquoise feathers about the stranger's shoulders. All went very well indeed, and the princess was happy to have found the man of her dreams, and the two of them loved all things, so that all things embraced and loved them. But Klappa, the witch with long crooked nails and black teeth and ice-like eyes, learned of all this from the bats. Loving evil and war and violence, she was angry that another should come into the land to rule when the old king died, for she had long waited for the breath to pass from his body so that she might rule again. Seeing how the people greeted Makanahola, she became tight-lipped and slit-eyed. One night she went to Roraima, a place of rocks where lived a wild man of terrible strength who sat in his cave all day, crouched over a fire of smoking green wood. Over the cave fire Klappa and the wild man whispered long and long, while bats flapped and fluttered and white worms crawled close to listen, for they plotted how to dispose of Makanahola. The wild man was all for dashing into the country, trampling down the guards that stood in his way, and beating the stranger with his great club of long, blunt thorns. But that Tlappa would not hear of, knowing that Makanahola could shoot an arrow that would speedily put an end to the wild man of the rocks. Far more crafty was she, remembering and telling the wild man of a strange plant that grew in the gloomy depths of a forest far away where, because of the tangled thicket, she could never go. No sooner had the wild man learnt of the strange plant than he sprang to his feet and with great bounds went crashing through the forest, overturning trees that stood in his way, upsetting huge rocks, splashing through swamps and climbing a rocky precipice like a wild cat until he came to the place where grew the evil weed. He was back again in his cave before midnight. Taking the weed, Tlappa dried it over a fire of rotten wood and crushed it into powder. The powder she cast into the air, and, carried by the wind, it fell where the king's people lived. Wherever it fell, wherever it touched, there grew hate and suspicion, jealousy and greed. Where the dust fell on plant or flower, though there was but the slightest fleck of it, there was immediately a withering and a dying. The very corn shriveled and shrunk. Where had been flowers, there grew in a single night dense, thorny tangle. The very weather changed, and the pleasant cool passed away, so that the days were hot and the nights icy cold. Some men, touched with a strange greed, laid claim to great tracts of earth, bidding others begone, and so for the first time in that land men quarreled and fought. Even the old king changed a little and, seeing the trouble that had come upon his land, was persuaded to believe that Makanahola was the cause. Word passed from mouth to mouth, and whispering tongues poisoned truth, and when Makanahola took his walks, grieving to see the withered flowers and fruits, people hid from his gaze. Thoughts passed to words, and words to deeds, and one day a crowd turned on Makanahola, and with sticks and stones drove him across the border and into a forest where, except for the cry of a distant bird, it was still as midnight. Sad at heart, Makanahola built a little shelter of branches and leaves, and day after day wandered alone. Nor had he living company until one day there came to him a dog, footsore and thin. The creature was hungry and weak and thorn-torn, and Makanahola took it in, washed and tended it, and shared with it his meal. And a poor enough meal it was, being of small berries and drops of tree gum and little roots. In the morning, when he went down to the stream to bathe, the dog did not follow him, and on his return, to his vast astonishment, he found in front of his house a field with growing corn and many food plants. It had grown up in less than an hour. So that evening he was full of gladness, and with his dog walked about in full enjoyment of the beautiful green earth, thankful for the humming bees and the gentle wind that moved the leaves, thankful for the only living creature that was with him. On the next day, when he returned from his stream, having left the dog sleeping in the sun, he found that his little bower of branches and leaves had been transformed to a house with furnishings all simple, clean, and bright. And around it were glorious flowers and fruits, and in the trees birds sang, and hummingbirds, looking like flashing emeralds, darted through the leaves. So again his heart was full of joy and thankfulness. The third day he made as if to go to the river, but instead turned and hid himself behind the house to watch. Then he saw the wonder, for the dove threw off its skin, and there stood the beautiful maiden whom he had known as the king's daughter. At once she set about making garments of colored cotton for him, and so rapidly she wrought that they fell from her hands like flower petals. Then she busied herself weaving a hammock of silk grass. Makanahola made no sign, but went down to the river as usual, and when he returned the dog ran to meet him, thrusting its moist nose into his hand. But the next day again he hid, and again the dog cast off its skin, and the princess went to the garden, and to her came a cloud of hummingbirds. Swiftly Makanahola ran to the dogskin, picked it up, and threw it into the fire, where it burned like dry leaves. Then the princess saw what had been done and gave a great cry of joy, for the spell was broken, and Makanahola knew a fresh vigor of soul. Hand in hand they returned to the land, and the old king, seeing them coming, went out to meet them. And all the people were with him, overjoyed that Makanahola had returned, seeing the evil that had come upon them had not been removed with his departure. Overjoyed, too, were they to see the princess again, for none knew to what place she had gone, knowing only that she had vanished one evening, and at the same time a dog had run swiftly through their midst. For certainly Tlapa the witch had laid some enchantment upon her with evil design. But evil, though it may touch the good, cannot forever bind it, wherefore the maiden resumed her own form some part of every day. There was a great meeting of all the people then, and Makanahola lost no time in seeking out the witch Tlapa, whom he killed with a silver-pointed arrow shot through her heart. As for the wild man of Roraima, it is said that learning of the death of the witch, he dashed away in great terror, and, sinking in the shaking mud, was seen no more. But the king of the seashell made Makanahola a ruler, and on the spot where the bower had been built and where he first saw the dove there was erected the temple of white stone, which you may see for yourself to this day if you go to Orinoco. The Calabash Man. There was once a woman who had an only son, and they lived in great contentment in a little house by the side of the lake and at the foot of a mountain. If you go to Guiana, you may see both lake and mountain to this day. In all that land there was no lad so straight, so tall, so graceful as Ora, and, what is better still, he was kind and gentle. At the close of the day when he came from his fishing, he and his mother would sit in the cool of the evening, watching the glory of the sunset and listening to the music of the silver cascade which fell from the mountain into the lake. Often the forest animals would come and play about before their house. The lively little agouti would sport with the black jaguar, and the great armadillo would let the coral snake coil on his shell, while birds of wondrous beauty flashed through the leaves of the trees like living fire. Great butterflies with silky white and green wings fluttered about the flowers, showing their beauty, and from them the old mother learned the way to weave bright designs into the hammocks that she made of silk grass. At such times, before the sun dropped into its purple bed of cloud, and before the million glowworms lit their lights, the queen ant would sing, "From forest and hill we come at your will. Call, Aura, call!" All went very well until one day Aura, going to the lake, found his basket net broken and torn, and taking it from the water saw with surprise that the fish which had been in it were eaten. Such a thing had never happened before, for in forest and hill he knew no enemy. As he stood in wonderment, the torn basket in his hand, he heard a voice behind him say, "From forest and hill we come at your will. Call, Aura, call." Looking around, he saw a woodpecker, and the bright beady eyes of the bird were looking at him. Thereupon Aura told the woodpecker to watch well, and setting a new basket net in the water, he went a little way into the forest to gather wild fruits. Not far had he gone when he heard the watching woodpecker call, "Tock! Tock!" Swiftly he ran, but though he sped like a deer, he was too late, for the second basket net was destroyed even more completely than the first, and again the fish were devoured. A third net was set, and this time he called upon the cuckoo to watch while he gathered his fruits. Very soon he heard the pawn, pawn of his new watcher, and Aura lost no time in running to the lakeside. There in the water and close to the basket net was the flat, mud-colored head of a swamp alligator with its dull and heavy-lidded eyes. Quick as lightning, Aura fitted an arrow to his bow and let fly, and the shaft struck the reptile between the eyes. A moment later, the beast disappeared into the water. The basket net had been partly broken by the alligator, but Aura mended it and again entered the forest. But before long he heard the cuckoo call, and much louder this time, so he ran like the wind, fitting an arrow to his bow as he went. On the lake bank stood a beautiful Indian maiden in a gown that looked like silver, and she was weeping bitterly. At that Aura's heart was touched with pity, for he could see no living thing unhappy and remain happy himself. Gently he took her by the hand and asked her to tell him her name. "Anu Anaitu," she said, and smiled through her tears like the sun after a summer rain. "From where do you come?" was his next question. "Far, far away, where the great owl lives," she made reply, and pointed in the direction of the dark forest. "And who is your father?" he asked, and at that there was a ripple of water rings on the lake, and Aura thought he saw the nose of the alligator. But she made no answer to his question. Instead, she covered her face with her hands and bent her head so that her hair fell about her like a cloud. Seeing her strange grief, Aura said no more, but led her to his mother, who received her kindly, and for many months the three of them dwelt together very happily. Yet whenever Anaitu thought of her father, she wept bitterly. At last there came a day when Aura asked the maiden to be his wife, and told her that if she would give him her hand, the two of them would make a journey to her own land so that she might say farewell to her people, telling them that she had made her home in a land of peace and brightness with those who loved her. Hearing that, little Anaitu wept with terror, telling Aura of the fearful journey that would be theirs, through a place where were great bats and gray hairy spiders and centipedes and harmful and fearful things. "Then stay with my mother and I shall go alone," said Aura, seeing her fear. "And I will seek out your father and tell him that all is well with you." "That is worse still," cried the maiden, "for there is an evil spirit in my land and my father is bewitched. Seeing you, he will destroy you and your mother and me as well, once he learns where we are." Greatly puzzled with all this, Aura went to see a wise old hermit who lived at the end of the lake, and to him he told his troubles and fears. After much thought, the hermit told Aura that he would make his journey in safety if he feared not and carried himself like a man. "And," said he, "if it should come to pass that you are offered the choice of things, see to it that you choose the simplest." More than that the wise man would not say, so Aura went home and straightway prepared his canoe, persuaded Anaitu to go with him, and presently they set off. The way was fearful enough, as the maiden had said, for much of it was through dark forests and between high river banks where the tree roots reached out black and twisted like evil serpents. Again, they had to pass through swamps where alligators slept, and strange yellow beasts with heads large as houses lay hidden. And for many long hours they wound in and out of tangled jungles where the sun never shone, and in the depths of which were strange things that roared so that the very trees trembled. After many days they came to a smooth stretch of sand, and then the maiden told him that they had arrived in the land of her father. "And now I must leave you," she said, "but my mother will come and offer you one of three things. See to it, dear Aura, that you choose wisely, for all depends upon your choice." At that she waved him a farewell and went up the bank, and so passed from his sight. Before long there came down the bank a wrinkled old woman with sorrowful eyes, and she bore 3 gourds. Setting them down by the side of the canoe, she bade Ora choose one. On the top of one gourd was a cover of gold, on the second a cover of silver, and on the third a cover of clay. Lifting the covers, Ora saw in the first fresh blood. In the gourd with the silver top he saw flesh, and in the third a piece of cassava bread. Ora bore in mind the words of the old hermit, and quickly chose the gourd that held the bread. "You have done well," said the old woman. "This is a land where men believe in gold alone, and much blood is spilled because of it. Far better is it that men should choose that which is in the earth. Now, having so chosen, I will lead you to my husband, whose name is Kaikuchi. But here cruelty reigns everywhere, and he may tear you to pieces." Ara had no mind to do otherwise than go through with his task, and so told the old woman. Whereupon she led him to the top of the bank, where he again saw his Anaitu, and the maiden and her mother hid Ora in a forest near the house, while they went in to prepare Kaikuchi for the visit. Hearing that the young man who loved his daughter was near, the old man fell into a most marvelous rage, and so great was his anger that he rushed out and bent trees as though they were reeds, and bit rocks as a man bites a crust of bread. So there was much trouble before he was persuaded to see the gentle Ora. Even then Anaitu begged Ora to return, but he threw his arms around her and was gone before she could say a word. Strange things happened as he ran to the house. Great branches broke and fell without hands touching them, and stones leaped from the earth and whizzed close to his ears, but he hastened on and entered into a hall. Kaikauchi was not there, but as Ora looked round, he came in running. The bewitched old man was strangely decked out with bones and teeth which dangled at the ends of strings fastened to his arms and legs, and his head was covered with a great calabash painted green, in the front of which were 2 holes pierced, through which he looked. For a moment Kaikauchi stood. Then, giving a terrible howl, he began to leap about, waving his arms and rattling the dangling bones and teeth. A very painful sight to Aura. The howling the man made was terrible. After much of this, he stopped, turning the holes of his calabash on Aura. "What can you do?" he yelled. "What can you do? Can you bend trees? Can you bite rocks? Can you leap like this?" Again he commenced to dance up and down, each leap being higher than the one before it, so that at last his calabash struck the roof. When he had quieted down again, Ora said, "I cannot leap, I cannot bend trees, and I cannot bite rocks as you do. But I can work with my hands and make whatever you wish made." Hearing that, Kaikuchi whirled about and gave 3 mighty leaps, rattling his bones and dangling teeth furiously. "Make me a magic stool," he shouted, "and carve it of wood, with the head of a jaguar at one end and my head carved at the other. And see to it that you have it finished by sunrise, or else you die." Then he gave a yell, whirled about, and rushed from the hall. Ora saw that the task would be hard, even if he did what he had been set to do in the quiet of his own home. But without having seen the face of Kaikauchi, he wondered greatly how he would complete his work. For all that he took his knife, selected a block of wood, and went to work, and he worked with such a will that by midnight he had it all finished, but the rough place at the end where was to appear the likeness of Kaikuchi. So he went to the old wife who had brought him the gourds and begged her to describe the features of her husband. But that she refused to do, saying that if she did so, Kaikauchi, who knew everything, being an enchanted man, would kill them all. An hour passed, and everything was the same. Ora's work unfinished, his will as strong as ever. Then to him came the gentle maiden who took him by the hand and led him into another chamber where the old man sat in a corner asleep, his green calabash over his head. In another corner of the room was a hammock, and into that Aura crept, thinking that if he kept quiet and remained hidden by some chance, the calabash might fall off and the face of the man be seen. But after looking long and seeing no move on the part of the sleeping man, he grew weak and weary. Out of the corner near him came a small voice which said, "From forest and hill we come at your will. Call, Aura, call!" And looking that way, he saw a mouse. At that the heart of Aura was glad, the more as he saw the mouse run to the sleeping man and begin to nibble at his hand. For a moment it looked as if Kai Kauchi would take off his calabash, for he was plainly annoyed. But instead, by chance, he set his hand on the mouse, caught it, and flung it to the end of the room. Again, a voice was heard, and this time Aura saw a spider dropping from the ceiling, and as it dropped it said, "From forest and hill, we come at your will. Call, Aura, call." Over to the sleeper ran the spider, but matters were no better than before, for Kai Kauchi dropped his hand, caught the spider, and threw it after the mouse. No sooner had Kai Kauchi fallen asleep again than there came into the room ants by hundreds and thousands, and leading them was the queen ant, who sang, "From forest and hill we come at your will. Call, Aura, call." Like little soldiers they marched on the sleeper, swarming over his hands, his body, his legs. Under the calabash they went, 100 of them. That was too much even for Kai Kuji, and he leaped to his feet, dashed the calabash to the earth, and fell to brushing off the ants in lively manner. But the calabash was broken to pieces by the force of the fall, and for the rest of that night he slept with his face exposed. From his hiding place it did not take long for Aura to learn his ugly features. Nor did it escape his notice that between the eyes was an arrow mark, and by that he knew that Kai Kuchi was also the alligator he had shot in the lake. When he was sure that the old man was asleep, he slipped out quietly and went to his work, and with such spirit he wrought that before sunrise he had carved the face on the end of the stool. Better still, so exact was his work that all who saw it knew the face of Kai Kauchi the Terrible. But when the old man saw it and noted the arrow mark between the eyes, he leaped higher than he had ever leaped before, having no calabash to hinder him, and declared that the task had been too easy and that another must be done. "Build me," he said, "a house of feathers before sundown, and see to it that there is no bird in the forest from which there is not a feather taken." Then, giving strict orders that no one should enter the part of the forest in which Aura was put, he leaped up and down several times, screaming horribly, after which he hastened away. When all was quiet, Aura lifted his head and sang, "From forest and hill, oh come, 'tis my will, I call, I call." Then there was a great rushing sound, and from everywhere came birds, sea birds and land birds, river birds and lake birds, birds that flew, ran, and waded. There were sober brown birds, and birds more glorious than the rainbow. There was a cloud of hummingbirds glittering like powdered gold, and there were proud ostriches. Chakars dropped from the sky singing, and blood-red flamingos raced with golden-crested wrens. There were songbirds and silent birds, and birds whose cry was like the sound of a golden bell. There were storks, hawks, vultures, condors, swans, lapwings, and mockingbirds. Not a moment did they lose. In and out and round about they went, weaving wonderfully, the busy beaks at work, and before an hour had passed there stood the most wonderful house of feathers that the eye of man ever saw. In the light of the sun it shone green, gold, violet, purple, brown, white, and scarlet. And when the last feather was woven, the condor called, and the beating of so many wings as the birds left made the very air throb. When all was again silent, it seemed to Aura that the work had been done in the twinkling of an eye. The minute the sun touched the edge of the world, Kai Kuchi came howling and leaping. When he saw the feather house, he stood for a moment with open mouth. So angry he was at the sight that his tongue was dry and parched, and he could say nothing. but the glory of what he saw dazzled and blinded him, and with a howl he turned and plunged into the depths of the forest and was seen no more. Some say that he was drowned in the lake of pitch. But Ora and Anaitu lived in the House of Feathers, and from that day to this the people of that land have been kind and gentle and have forgotten the evil days when cruelty reigned everywhere. Also, they know now that there are things more glorious than gold. Naha. The fighter. The fighter. Aye. In the far south near Cape Horn there is a place of many islands, and it is a corner of the world where winds are piercing cold and great black clouds scurry across a lead-gray sky. From snow-clad mountains slide rivers of ice from which break off mighty pieces to fall into the sea with thunder sounds. It is a land wrinkled into narrow valleys that are always gloomy and cold and wet. Cold, ice cold is the gray-green sea, and the wild cries of a million seabirds fill the air. Sometimes great albatrosses sweep up the channels between the high, jagged mountains or drop low to sail over penguin-crowded rocks, and sometimes the mountain echoes are deep-toned with the booming of walrus and the barking of seals. But people are few. There are Indians there, poor gentle folk who fish in the sea and who know nothing but a life of cold, and they paddle or sit crouching in their canoes, taking no heed of the biting wind and the snow that falls on their naked bodies. Traveling in that part of the world, I came upon a boy who had been left somehow, on an island not much larger than a good-sized playground. He must have been there alone for some months, for he had lived on mussels and shellfish, and the empty shells formed a good-sized heap about his sleeping place. Though I questioned him closely later, when we came to know one another, I could never learn how he got there. He was, I suppose, about 10 years old, and certainly bright and intelligent. As for his memory, it was quite remarkable, and he picked up words and the names of things very rapidly. Altogether, he stayed with me for 3 months, and I was often astonished at the aptness with which he did some things, as, for instance, the making of an arrowhead from a piece of broken bottle. But other things he seemed quite unable to do. A knot in a rope puzzled him sorely, and for a long time a belt buckle was a deep mystery to him. One day I found that he was trying to tell me a story about a seal, for we had seen several that morning. For a while I paid no attention, being occupied at something or other that required care, but soon it dawned on me that he was very earnest, and that the tale was a long one. Fearing that I had missed much by my preoccupation and carelessness, I made him tell it to me a second and a third and a fourth time, and presently made shift to piece things together, and so get a fair notion of his story. I have called the tale by the name of the hero, and have set it down in my own words, and as I understood it. Were I to write it in his words, it would go something like this: Many day, a far day, underwater man, walk water. Eat man my father's father, men cry much hard. There would have to be indicated, too, much gesticulation and arm-waving by way of illustration and emphasis. Long years ago, the people of that land were sadly at the mercy of the wild, hairy folk who lived under the sea. To be sure, there were long periods when they were left in peace to do their fishing, though from their canoes they could look down into the waters and see the undersea people walking on the sands at the bottom, very shadowy and vague, though, in the greenish light. Still, it was clear enough for those who watched to see their hair-covered bodies, their long and serpent-like arms, and their noseless faces. But again, there were times when the undersea men marched in great numbers out of the water and caught the landmen, dragging them down to their deaths. In such numbers they came that there was no resisting them. Nor was there escape, for the undersea people could walk on the water, going faster than the wind itself. With ear-splitting booming they would form themselves into a wide circle about the canoes, then draw nearer in wild rushes or strange slidings and drag the frightened men into the green-gray water. Sometimes a few only were taken, and those that were left, looking down, might see the undersea folk dragging their fellows to great rocks to which they bound them with ropes of leathery kelp. One day the undersea people caught Naha, a youth strong as a wild wind, whose muscles were knotted like oak branches, one who smiled when danger came. 5 of the noseless people attacked him, and of the 5, Naha sent 3 to the bottom of the sea with broken necks, for though he smote them with his clenched fist alone, they staggered back and swiftly sank, and the blood that gushed from their mouths made a spreading pink cloud in the water. But soon the sea was alive with wild, raging faces, and the roaring of them was like the southeast wind in the forest trees. Yet Naha stood in his little canoe, cold and calm, and the smile did not leave his lips. Stealthily they crept toward him, none at first daring to attack, until with a fierce noise and clamor all rushed together, leaping upon him in his canoe and bearing it down by sheer press and weight, Naha in the midst of the tangled mass of hair-covered creatures. Some who saw that fight said that the sudden silence when the waters closed over them hurt the ears like a thunderclap, but the true-hearted Naha was the last to disappear, and while he smote the black-haired ones furiously, the smile of scorn was still on his face. Like a picture in a dream, some saw the fight among the rocks at the bottom of the sea, saw the noseless ones crowding about the lad, saw others leaping over the heads of those who did not dare to near him, saw others again creeping in the sea sand, trailing kelp ropes to bind him. Many fell in that battle under the sea, and the low waves that lapped the shore were red with blood that day. How it ended none knew, for with the dying light and the sand clouds that hung in the water all became gray at last and then swiftly faded. That night the land people wept for Naha the untamed, Naha whose spear was like lightning, Naha whose canoe rode the waves like the brown storm birds. Tales were whispered of how he never bent beneath a load, of how in the blackest night he drove his boat before the storm, of how once he swept out to sea after a great whale and slew it, so that his people were saved from the hunger death. But with the screaming of the morning seagulls, Naha came to them again, walking up out of the sea, and his face was set and stern. Nor did he say a word until he had eaten and thought a while. The tale he told was of the underseas, and of his wandering after the battle in which he left so many dead in bloody sand. He had been sore pressed, he said, but had broken away and come to a door in a cave which he entered. It was a vast cavern in which he found himself, so vast that he could not at first see the end, and the roof of it he never saw, it being lost in a strange, cool, green light. The floor of the place was of gold dust and silver sand, and out of it grew networks of white rocks about which swam fish of many gay colors, while everywhere seaweeds swayed in gently moving water. Soon he came to a place where, on a seat of white, sat a woman with bent head, and she was fair of skin, and her golden hair floated in the water like a cloud. Being bidden, Naha told her the tale of the fight and how the earth people were woe-ridden because of the evil work of the undersea folk. Patiently she listened, her cheek on her hand and her eyes large with grief, and when Naha had done she told him that there was but one way to free his people, and that was the way of the White Death. Much more she told him, and then gave him a great seashell and made him know that when he blew it the great cold that lies under the 7 stars would be freed and the undersea people driven for all time to their own place. Then she stepped from her seat and taking Naha by the hand gazed at him long. Many there are, Naha, who live not to know of the good that they do. He who looses the white death must himself be stilled. This I tell you, Naha, lest your heart fail you, she said. That was all, for he did not tell the tale of how he came again to the land, but he showed them the great shell and said that his mind was made up to free his own people, though he himself slept the sleep. At that the people set up a great shout, and they were not wanting those who offered to sound the blast, saying that it were better for Naha to lead the people. But that Naha refused, and added that the undersea woman had told him that before the blast was blown all the land people should take themselves and their belongings to a far land under the sun, for staying where they were, it would do but small good to drive the undersea people to their own place forever, seeing that they themselves must also be ice-stiffened. Then arose a confusion of talk, many being unwilling to leave the land where their fathers and the fathers of their fathers had lived. But Naha prevailed and overruled them, and soon the day came when there was a great movement, and canoes were loaded, and the land people set off for the country under the sun. So Naha was left alone. Over the length and the breadth of the land Naha walked, to see if by mischance some had been left, but there were none. And when the sea-hen and the albatross and the gull and the brown storm-bird saw the hair-covered noseless people come out of the sea, when with the black loneliness of night the snow came and the land waters were prisoned under glassy ice, when the morning sun looked on a world of rime and crystal frost, then Naha put the great shell to his lips and blew a blast that woke the echoes. So the world soon grew faint and sleepy, and all living creatures except the noseless ones fled or flew after the land people, and there was strange stillness everywhere. Trees that had been green grew horned and black and then ghost white, and the black wind came raging and furious, and grinding, groaning ice mountains swam in the sea and locked the land, and hills were cased in barrel walls. Seeing all that, for a time the undersea folk were full of delight, believing themselves to be masters of the land. But soon they feared the glistening white of the world, the black scurrying clouds, and the fast thickening ice. So they sought the sea, but no sea was there, only thick-ribbed ice across which swept snow-laden, stinging winds, and instead of the quiet of the underwater there was the calm of the white death. Under the eaves of the rocks they crouched, but it was small help, for with the biting cold they shriveled and shrank. Close they hugged themselves, their elbows thrust into their hairy sides, their legs bent, making themselves small. And thus they stayed, nevermore to be as they were. For in that great cold the underwater people became seals, and seals they remained. Well and bravely stood Naha, while all this came to pass, scornful of the death that clawed at him. Nor did he lay down to die until the great cold had passed away, and his people returned to find the underwater folk forevermore bound to their own place, powerless to harm, looking always with wide, wondering eyes, lest the mighty Naha again steal upon them and bring the great white death. The hummingbird and the flower. Good morning, pretty flower. Good morning, little hummingbird. May I have some honey, please? Certainly. Here is plenty. Help yourself. Thank you. It is very good of you. Is there anything that I can do for you in return? Well, I hear so little, seeing that I do not go abroad, that I love to be told things. I wish that you would tell me how you came to have so beautiful a dress. I have often wondered as I saw you flashing past. Have you indeed? Well, let me think. I believe I have heard that it was because of a mouse that I have it. A mouse? How can that be, busy little colibri? A mouse, you know, is dull and gray. Then, Florsilla, if it was not a mouse, it was mud. My dear hummingbird, you must be wrong. You know as well as I do that mud is dull and gray. Won't you stop your humming a moment and think? Oh, now I know. It was because of a panther. Dear, dear colibri, that is worse still. A panther, did you say? I must have heard wrong. Isn't that right either? Well, it must have been all three, the mouse, the mud, and the panther. So there now. But how sweet this honey is. Indeed, I am glad that you find it so. But please tell me about your pretty dress. Oh yes, I forgot, thinking of the honey. One has so much to think of. I remember now perfectly well. It was Paloma the dove who told me all about it yesterday, but a day and a night is a very, very long time to remember a long tale. Then tell me before you forget. Well, once all hummingbirds were gray, so I have heard. Well, a big panther was going through the woods very quietly, and he stepped on a mouse nest and happened to kill all the baby mice. Dear me. I am so sorry to hear that. So when the mother mouse came to her home and saw what had happened, she was very much annoyed, saying that the panther was too big and too clumsy and did not look where he was going. Well, Colibri, she would be annoyed. You know, I have often thought how nice it would be if mice and panthers and all creatures did not move about as they do. They run about so, and they jump and skip, and it is no wonder that things happen. Suppose trees and flowers and bushes were as restless as animals. Think how it would be with great trees treading on little flowers, and thorn bushes running about and tearing down the gentle flores de la re, and scratching the tender skins of the grapes. Now if I were queen, I would make a law so that all those forest creatures that run on four legs should just stand and grow as we do, and— Please do not interrupt, or I may forget the tale. Oh, I beg your pardon. Go on, please. Well, of course, the panther told the mother mouse how it had happened and said that he was sorry and that he would be more careful, but she scolded him and kept it in her heart to punish him. But, little Colibri, if he said that he was sorry and if it could not be helped, then it seems to me— Really, little flower, you must listen. You have no idea how difficult it is to tell a tale, so please do not interrupt. One day when the panther was asleep, the mouse crept up with some gum which she had taken from the tree and sealed up the panther's eyes. Then she took mud from the laguna and plastered it over the gum, and then more gum and more mud, so that the panther could not tell day from night. Dear me, that was very unkind and very dreadful. I am as sorry for the panther as I am for the mother mouse. Well, anyway, that proves that it was a mouse and a panther and mud, just as I said. But, dear hummingbird, how about the dress of many colors? I am coming to that, but you interrupt so. The panther roared and roared and roared until the very softest of his roars shook the esteros, and the alligators were frightened and dived to the bottom of the water. Hearing all that noise, a hummingbird asked the panther what the noise was all about. That was very good of the hummingbird. And what did the panther say? He told the hummingbird all about it and asked him to kill the mouse, but that the hummingbird would not do. Of course not. I never killed a mouse. So then the panther said that if the hummingbird would take away the gum and the mud so that he could see again, he would do anything that he could in return. You see, little flower, the panther is wise because he travels so much, and all things that travel know a great deal. I am not so sure of that, Colibri. All this summer I have traveled up this tree and so have gone a great distance, but I know very little. That is different. No one wants a flower to be wise. To be beautiful is enough. Oh, but please listen and do not talk so much. I am very sorry that I interrupted you, little hummingbird. Well, the hummingbird told the panther that she wished to have a beautiful dress, as beautiful as the dress of the sunbird, and asked him to tell her where she could get bright colors. Then, before the panther answered, she asked him to tell her how the lianas got the red and yellow and purple for their blossoms. This is the most interesting thing I have ever heard, and I hope the tale will not be short. Did the panther know? Of course he knew. He told her that the flowers got their color from the earth, and he also told her where there was clay of many colors, and where there were gold and silver and rubies. So the hummingbird picked and picked until the panther's eyes were unsealed and the big fellow gave a roar of gladness. All that day panther and hummingbird worked, bringing colored clay and colored sands, and silver and gold, and rubies and opals, and the blue and crimson of sunset, and the silver of the moon and the stars, and the tender green of shady forests, and the blackness of ebony. Out of all these the hummingbird dressed herself, and for misty moving wings she took the spun silk of the spider and the soft thread of the sumaha. And that is how the hummingbird got her dress. There now. I am glad to know that, dear hummingbird, and I thank you for telling me. And I, dear flower, thank you for the honey. Goodbye then, if you must go. Goodbye, Florcilla. BZZZHMME mean. To script, the magic ball. A tale of the Chuput country. A cold-eyed witch lived in the Cordilleras, and when the first snow commenced to fall, she was always full of glee, standing on a rock, screaming like a wind gale and rubbing her hands. For it pleased her to see the winter moon, the green country blotted out, the valleys white, the trees snow-laden, and the waters ice-bound and black. Winter was her hunting time and her eating time, and in the summer she slept. So she was full of a kind of savage joy when there were leaden clouds and drifting gales, and she waited and watched, ever ready to spring upon frost-stiffened creatures that went wandering down to the warmer lowlands. This witch was a wrinkled creature, hard of eye, thin-lipped, with hands that looked like roots of trees, and so tough was her skin that knife could not cut nor arrow pierce it. In the country that swept down to the sea she was greatly feared, and hated too. The hate came because by some strange magic she was able to draw children to her one by one, and how she did it no man knew. But the truth is that she had a magic ball, a ball bright and shining and of many colors, and this she left in places where children played, but never where man or woman could see it. One day, near the lake called Oretta, a brother and sister were at play and saw the magic ball at the foot of a little hill. Pleased with its brightness and beauty, Natalia ran to it, intending to pick it up and take it home, but, to her surprise, as she drew near to it, the ball rolled away, then, a little way off, came to rest again. Again she ran to it and almost had her hand on it when it escaped, exactly as a piece of thistledown does, just as she was about to grasp it. So she followed it, always seeming to be on the point of catching it, but never doing so. And as she ran, her brother Louis followed, careful lest she should come to harm. The strange part of it was that every time the ball stopped it rested close to some berry bush or by the edge of a crystal-clear spring, so that she, like all who were thus led away, always found at the moment of resting something to eat or to drink or to refresh herself. Nor, strangely enough, did she tire, but because of the magic went skipping and running and jumping just as long as she followed the ball. Nor did anyone under the spell of that magic note the passing of time, for days were like hours and a night like the shadow of a swiftly flying cloud. At last, chasing the ball, Natalia and Luis came to a place in the valley where the Rio Chico runs between great hills, and it was dark and gloomy and swept by heavy gray clouds. The land was strewn with mighty broken rocks, and here and there were patches of snow, and soon great snowflakes appeared in the air. Then boy and girl were terror-struck, for they knew with all the wandering and twisting and turning they had lost their way. But the ball still rolled on, though slower now, and the children followed. But the air grew keener and colder and the sun weaker, so that they were very glad indeed when they came to a black rock where, at last, the ball stopped. Natalia picked it up and for a moment gazed at its beauty, but for a moment only. For no sooner had she gazed at it and opened her lips to speak than it vanished as a soap bubble does, at which her grief was great. Louise tried to cheer her, and finding that her hands were icy cold, led her to the north side of the rock where it was warmer, and there he found a niche like a lap between two great arms, and in the moss-grown cranny Natalia coiled herself up and was asleep in a minute. As for Louise, knowing that as soon as his sister had rested they must set out about finding a way home, he sat down intending to watch. But not very long did he keep his eyes open, for he was weary and sad at heart. He tried hard to keep awake, even holding his eyelids open with his fingers, and he stared hard at a sunlit hilltop across the valley, but even that seemed to make him sleepy. Then, too, there were slowly nodding pine trees and the whispering of leaves coming in a faint murmur from the mountainside. So soon, Louise slept. Natalia, being out of the blustering wind, was very comfortable in the little niche between the great stone arms, and she dreamed that she was at home. Her mother, she thought, was combing her hair and singing as she did so she forgot her hunger and weariness, and in her dreamland knew nothing of the bare black rocks and snow-patched hills. Instead, she seemed to be at home where the warm firelight danced on the walls and lighted her father's brown face to a lively red as he mended his horse gear. She saw her brother, too, with his jet-black hair and cherry-red lips. But her mother, she thought, grew rough and careless and pulled her hair so that she gave a little cry of pain and awoke. Then in a flash she knew where she was, and was chilled to the bone with the piercing wind that swept down from the mountain top. Worse still, in front of her stood the old witch of the hills, pointing with knotty forefinger, and there were nails on her hands and feet that looked like claws. Natalia tried to rise but could not, and her heart was like stone when she found what had happened. It was this: while she slept, the witch had stroked and combed her hair, and meanwhile wrought magic, so that the girl's hair was grown into the rock so very close that she could not as much as turn her head. All that she could do was to stretch forth her arms, and when she saw Louis a little way off, she called to him most piteously. But good Louis made no move. Instead, he stood with arms wide apart like one who feels a wall in the dark, moving his hands this way and that. Then Natalia wept, not understanding and little knowing that the witch had bound Louis with a spell, so that there seemed to be an invisible wall around the rock through which he could not pass, try as he would. But he heard the witch singing in her high and cracked voice, and this is what she sang. Valley all pebble sown, valley where wild winds moan, come, mortals, come! Valley so cool and white, valley of winter night, come, children, come, straight like a shaft to mark, come they to cold and dark, children of men. Then she ceased and stood with her root-like finger up, raised, and from nearby came the voice of a great white owl, which took up the song, saying, Things of the dark and things without name, save us from light and the torch's red flame. Now all this was by starlight, but the moment the owl had ceased, from over the hill came a glint of light as the pale moon rose, and with a sound like a thunderclap the witch melted into the great rock, and the owl flapped away heavily. "Brother," whispered the girl, "you heard what the owl said?" "Yes, sister, I heard," he answered. "Brother, come to me, I am afraid," said Natalia, and commenced to cry a little. "Sister," he said, "I try, but I cannot. There is something through which I cannot pass. I can see, but I cannot press through." "Can you not climb over, dear Louise?" asked Natalia. "No, Natalia. I have reached high as I can, but the wall that I cannot see goes up and up. Is there no way to get in on the other side of the rock, dear Louise? I am very cold and afraid being here alone." "Sister, I have walked around, I have felt high and low, but it is always the same. I cannot get through, I cannot climb over, I cannot crawl under. But I shall stay here with you, so fear not." At that Natalia put her hands to her face and wept a little, but very quietly, and it pained Louise to see the tears roll down her cheeks and turn to little ice pearls as they fell. After a while Natalia spoke again, but through sobs. "Brother mine, you heard what the owl said." "Yes, sister." "Does it mean nothing to you?" she asked. "Nothing," he replied. "But listen," said Natalia. These were the words, "Save us from light and the torch's red flame." "I heard that, Natalia." "What does it mean?" "It means, brother, that the things in this horrible valley fear fire. So go, brother, leave me a while, but find fire, coming back with it swiftly. There will be sickening loneliness, so haste, haste." Hearing that, Luis was sad, for he was in no mood to leave his sister in that plight. Still she urged him, saying, "Speed, brother, speed!" Even then he hesitated, until with a great swoop there passed over the rock a condor wheeling low, and it said as it passed, "Fire will conquer frosted death." "You hear, brother," said Natalia. "So speed and find fire and return before night." Then Luis stayed no longer, but waved his sister a farewell and set off down the valley, following the condor that hovered in the air, now darting away and now returning. So Luis knew that the great bird led him, and he ran, presently finding the river and following it until he reached the great vega where the waters met. At the meeting of the waters he came to a house, a poor thing made of earth and stones snuggled in a warm fold of the hills. No one was about there, but as the condor flew high and, circling in the air, became a small speck, Luis knew that it would be well to stay a while and see what might befall. Pushing open the door, he saw by the ashes in the fireplace that someone lived there, for there were red embers well covered to keep the fire alive. So, seeing that the owner of the house would return soon, he made himself free of the place, which was the way of that country, and brought fresh water from the spring. Then he gathered wood and piled it neatly by the fireside. Next he blew upon the embers and added twigs and sticks until a bright fire glowed, after which he took the broom of twigs and swept the earth floor clean. How the man of the house came into the room Luis never knew, but there he was, sitting by the fire on a stool. He looked at things, but said nothing to Luis, only nodding his head. Then he brought bread and yerba and offered some to Luis. After they had eaten, the old man spoke, and this is what he said: "Wicked is the White Witch, and there is but one way to defeat her." "What, lad, is the manner of her defeat? Tell me that." Then Luis, remembering what the condor had said, repeated the words, "Fire will conquer frosted death." "True," said the man slowly, nodding his head, "and your sister is there. Now here comes our friend the condor, who sees far and knows much. Now with cold grows faint her breath, fire will conquer frosted death." Having said that, the great bird wheeled up sharply. But no sooner was it out of sight than a turkey came running and stood a moment gobbling. To it the old man gave a lighted brand, repeating the words the condor had spoken. Off sped the turkey with the blazing stick, running through marsh and swamp in a straight line, and Luis and the old man watched. Soon the bird came to a shallow lagoon, yet made no halt. Straight through the water it sped, and so swiftly that the spray dashed up on either side. High the turkey held the stick, but not high enough, for the splashing water quenched the fire, and seeing that, the bird returned, dropping the blackened stick at the old man's feet. "Give me another, for the maiden is quivering cold," said the turkey. "This time I will run round the lake." "No, no," answered the man. "You must know that when the water spirit kisses the Fire King dies. So that you may remember, from now and forever you will carry on your feathers the marks of rippling water." Down again swooped the condor, and a little behind him came a goose, flying heavily. As before, the condor cried, "Now with cold grows faint her breath, fire will conquer frosted death," then flew away again toward the Witch Mountain. To the goose the old man gave a blazing stick, and at once the brave bird set off, flying straight in the direction the condor had taken. Over vega and over lagoon she went, pausing only at a snow-clad hilltop because the stick had burned close to her beak. So she dropped it in the snow to get a better hold, and when she picked it up again there was but a charred thing. Sad enough, the goose returned to the house, bearing the blackened stick, and begged to be given another chance. "No, no," said the old man. "The Silver Snow Queen's kiss is death to the Fire King. That is something you must remember. From now on and forever you must carry feathers of gray like the ashes. But here comes the condor, and we must hear his message." Sadly then the goose went away, her feathers ash-gray, and the condor wheeled low again, calling, "Fainter grows the maiden's breath, night must bring the frosted death," and having said, like an arrow he shot off. No sooner had he gone than the long-legged, long-billed flamingo dropped to the ground. "Your beak is long," said the old man, "but fly swiftly, for the stick is short." The flamingo took the burning stick by the end and made straight for the mountain, racing with all possible speed. As for Luis, he made up his mind to tarry no longer and set off, running like a deer. But an ostrich, seeing him, spread her wings like sails and ran by his side. On her back Luis placed his hand, and with that help sped as fast as the flamingo. In the air the flamingo went like an arrow, resting not, although the blazing fire burned her neck and breast until it became pink and red. But that she heeded not. Straight up the valley and to the rock where Natalia was bound went she, and into a heap of dried moss on the south side of the rock she dropped the blazing stick. Up leaped the dancing flames, and with a tremendous noise the rock flew into 1,000 pieces, and the power of the witch was gone forever. As for Natalia, she was at once freed, and with her gentle, cool hand stroked the breast of the flamingo so that the burns were healed, but as a sign of its bravery the bird has carried a crimson breast from that day to this. As for Natalia and Luis, they lived for many, many years in the valley, and about them birds of many kinds played and lived and reared their young, and the magic ball of the witch lived only in the memory of men. El Enano. Everyone disliked El Enano who lived in the forest, because he always lay hidden in dark places, and when woodmen passed he jumped out on them and beat them and took their dinners from them. He was a squat creature, yellow of skin and snag-toothed, and his legs were crooked, his arms were crooked, and his face was crooked. There were times when he went about on all fours, and then he looked like a great spider, for he had scraggy whiskers that hung to the ground and looked like legs. At other times he had the mood to make himself very small like a little child, and then he was most horrible to see, for his skin was wrinkled and his whiskers hung about him like a ragged garment. Yet all of that the people might have forgiven and he might have been put up with, were it not for some worse tricks. What was most disliked was his trick of walking softly about a house in the night time while the people were inside, suspecting nothing, perhaps singing and talking. Seeing them thus, El Enano would hide in the shadows until someone went for water to the spring, then out he would leap, clinging fast to the hair of the boy or man, and beating, biting, scratching the while. Being released, the tortured one would of course run to reach the house, but El Enano would hop on one leg behind, terribly fast, and catch his victim again just as a hand was almost laid on the door latch. Nor could an alarm be raised, because El Enano cast a spell of silence so that, try as one would, neither word nor shout would come. Then there was his other evil trick of hiding close to the ground and reaching out a long and elastic arm to catch boy or girl by the ankle. But that was not worse than his habit of making a noise like hail or rain, hearing which the people in the house would get up to close a window, and there, looking at them from the dark but quite close to their faces, would be the grinning Enano, holding in his hands his whiskers that looked like a frightening curtain, his eyes red and shining like rubies. That was very unpleasant indeed, especially when a person was alone in the house. Nor was it much better when he left the window, for he would hop and skip about the house yard for hours, screaming and howling and throwing sticks and stones. So, wherever he was, there was chill horror. One day, a good old woman who lived alone went with her basket to gather berries. El Enano saw her and at once made himself into a little creature no larger than a baby and stretched himself on a bed of bright moss between two trees, leafless and ugly. He pretended to be asleep, though he whimpered a little as a child does when it has a bad dream. The good old woman was short-sighted, but her ears were quick, and hearing the soft whimper she found the creature and took it in her arms. To do that bent her sadly, for Enano when small was the same weight as when his full size. "Oh, poor thing," she said, "someone has lost a baby. Or perhaps some wild creature has carried the tender thing from its home. So, lest it perish, I will take care of it, though to be sure, a heavier baby I never held." The dame had no children of her own and, though poor, was both willing and glad to share what she had with any needy creature. Gently she took it home, and having put dry sticks on the fire, she made a bed of light twigs, which she covered with a mat of feathers. Then she bustled about, getting bread and milk for supper for the little one, feeling happy at heart because she had rescued the unhappy creature from the dismal forest. At first she was glad to see the appetite of the homeless thing, for it soon finished the bread and milk and cried for more. "Bless me! It must be half-starved," she said. "It may have my supper." So she took the food she had set out for herself, and El Enano swallowed it as quickly as he had swallowed the first bowl. Yet still he cried for more. Off then to the neighbors she went, borrowing milk from this one, bread from that, rice from another, until half the children of the village had to go on short commons that night. The creature devoured all that was brought, and still yelled for more, and the noise it made was ear-splitting. But as it ate and felt the warmth, it grew and grew. "Santa Maria," said the dame, "what wonderful thing is this? Already it is no longer a baby, but a grown child. Almost it might be called ugly, but that, I suppose, is because it was motherless and lost. It is all very sad." Then, because she had thought it ugly, she did the more for it, being sorry for her thoughts, though she could not help nor hinder them. As for the creature itself, having eaten all in the house, it gave a grunt or two, turned heavily on its side, and went to sleep, snoring terribly. Next morning matters were worse, for El Enano was stretched out on the floor before the fire, his full size, and seeing the dame he called for food, making so great a noise that the very windows shook, and his cries were heard all over the village. So to still him, and there being nothing to eat in the house, the good old woman went out and told her tale to the neighbors, asking their help and advice, and to her house they all went flocking to look at the strange creature. One man, a stout-hearted fellow, told El Enano that it was high time for him to be going, hearing which the ugly thing shrieked with wicked laughter. "Well, bring me food," it said, looking at the man with red eyes. "Bring me food, I say, and when I have eaten enough I may leave you. But bring me no child's food, but rather food for 26 men. Bring an armadillo roasted, and a pig and a large goose, and many eggs, and the milk of 20 cows. Nor be slow about it, for I must amuse myself while I wait, and it may well be that you will not care for the manner of my amusement." Indeed, there was small likelihood of anyone there doing that, for his amusement was in breaking things about the house, the tables and benches, the pots and the olas, and when he had made sad havoc of the woman's house, he started on the house next door, smashing doors and windows, tearing up flowers by the roots, chasing the milk goats and the chickens, and setting dogs to fight. Nor did he cease in his mischief until the meal was set out for him, when he leaped upon it and crammed it down his throat with fearful haste, leaving neither bone nor crumb. The people of the village stood watching, whispering one to another behind their hands, how they were shocked at all that sight, and when at last the meal was finished, the stout-hearted man who had spoken before stepped forward. "Now, sir," said he to El Enano, "seeing that you have eaten enough and more than enough, you will keep your word, going about your business and leaving this poor woman and us in peace, will you?" "No." "No." "No!" roared El Enano, each no being louder than the one before it. "But you promised," said the man. What the creature said when answering that made nearly everyone there faint with horror. It said, "What I promised was that I would leave when I had eaten enough. I did not." The bold man interrupted then, saying, "Well, you have eaten enough." "Ah, yes, for one meal," answered the cruel Enano. "But I meant that I would leave when I have eaten enough for always. There is tomorrow and tomorrow night. There is the day after that, and the next day, and the next day. There are to be weeks of eating, and months of eating, and years of eating. You are stupid people if you think that I shall ever have eaten enough, so I shall not leave. No, no, no." Having said that, the creature laughed in great glee and began to throw such things as he could reach against the walls, and so many good things were shattered. Now for 3 days that kind of thing went on, at the end of which time the men of the place were at their wits' ends to know what to do, for almost everything eatable in the village had gone down the creature's throat. Sad at heart, seeing what had come to pass, the good old woman went out and sat down to weep by the side of a quiet pool, for it seemed to her to be a hard thing that what she had done in kindness had ended thus, and that the house she had built and loved and kept clean and sweet should be so sadly wrecked and ruined. Her thoughts were broken by the sound of a voice, and turning she saw a silver-gray fox sitting on a rock and looking at her. "It is well enough to have a good cry," he said, "but it is better to be gay and have a good laugh." "Ah, good evening, Señor Zorro," answered the dame, drying her tears. "But who can be gay when a horrible creature is eating everything? Who can be otherwise than sad, seeing the trouble brought on friends? The last," she added, "being one of those who are always saddened by the cheerlessness of others." "You need not tell me," said the fox. "I know everything that has passed." And he put his head a little sideways like a wise young dog and seemed to smile. "But what is there to do?" asked the dame. "I am in serious case indeed. This Alicado says that he will make no stir until he has had enough to eat for all his life, and certainly he makes no stir to go away." "The trouble is that you give him enough and not too much," said the fox. "Too much, you say? We have given him too much already, seeing that we have given him all that we have," said the old dame a little angrily. "Well, what you must do is to give him something that he does not like. Then he will go away," said the fox. "Easier said than done," answered the old woman with spirit. "Did we but give him something of which he liked, not the taste, then he would eat 10 times more to take the bad taste away. Señor Zorro, with all your cleverness, you are but a poor adviser." After that the fox thought a long while before saying anything. Then coming close to the old woman and looking up into her face, he said, "Make your mind easy. He shall have enough to eat this very night, and all that you have to do is to see that your neighbors do as I say, nor be full of doubt should I do anything that seems to be contrary." So the good old woman promised to warn her neighbors, knowing well the wisdom of the fox, and together they went to her house, where they found El Enano stretched out on the floor looking like a great pig, and every minute he gave a great roar. The neighbors were both angry and afraid, for the creature had been very destructive that day. Indeed, he had taken delight in stripping the thatched roofs, and had desisted only when the men of the place had promised to double the amount of his meal. Not 5 minutes had the fox and the dame been in the house when the men of the place came in with things, with berries and armadillos, eggs and partridges, turkeys and bread, and much fish from the lake. At once they set about cooking, while the women commenced to brew a great bowl of knot-grass tea. Soon the food was cooked, and El Enano fell to as greedily as ever. The fox looked at Enano for a while, then said, "You have a fine appetite, my friend. What will there be for the men and the women and the children, and for me to eat?" "You may have what I leave, and eat it when I end," said El Enano. "Let us hope then that our appetites will be light," said the fox. A little later the fox began to act horribly, jumping about the room and whining and calling the people lazy and inhospitable. "Think you," he said, "that this is the way to treat a visitor? A pretty thing indeed to serve one and let the other go hungry. Do I get nothing at all to eat? Quick, bring me potatoes and roast them, or it will be bad for all of you. The mischief I do shall be 10 times worse than any done already." Knowing that some plan was afoot, the people ran out of the house and soon came back with potatoes, and the fox showed them how he wanted them roasted on the hearth. So they were placed in the ashes and covered with hot coals, and when they were well done the fox told everyone to take a potato, saying that El Inano, who was crunching the bones of the animals he had eaten, would not like them. But all the while the men were eating, the fox ran from one to another whispering things, but quite loud enough for Enano to hear. "Hush!" said he. "Say nothing. El Enano must not know how good they are, and when he asks for some, tell him that they are all gone." "Yes, yes," said the people, keeping in with the plan. "Do not let Enano know." By this time El Enano was suspicious and looked from one man to another. "Give me all the potatoes," he said. "They are all eaten except mine," said the fox, "but you may taste that." So saying, he thrust the roasted potato into the hands of Enano, and the creature crammed it down its throat at once. "Ha! It is good," he roared. "Give me more, more, more. Am-o-ari." "We have no more," said the fox very loud. Then quite softly to those who stood near him he added, "Say nothing about the potatoes on the hearth," but loudly enough for El Enano to hear, though quite well he knew that there were none. "Ah, I heard you," roared El Enano. "There are potatoes on the hearth. Give them to me." "We must let him have them," said the fox, raking the red-hot coals to the front. "Out of the way!" cried El Enano, reaching over the fox and scooping up a double handful of hot coals, believing them to be potatoes. Red hot as they were, he swallowed them, and in another moment was rolling on the floor, howling with pain as the fire blazed in his stomach. Up he leaped again and dashed out of the house to fling himself by the side of the little river. The water was cool to his face, and he drank deep, but the water in his stomach turned to steam, so that he swelled, and presently there was a loud explosion that shook the very hills, and El Enano burst into 1,000 pieces. The Hero Twins. There was once a woman who had 2 sons, and they were twins, so much alike that the mother herself could not tell one from the other. So Hunahpu always wore a crimson feather and Balanque a blue one. As children they spent their days in the open air, playing in the forest, swimming in the lake, and wandering on the plains, and so doing they came to know the animals and the birds, finding the young ones and playing with them, so that it was no uncommon sight to see them come home with a panther following at their heels as a dog does. They knew where to find the nests of birds of all kinds, fed the young ones, and petted them, until with a call they could bring from the trees clouds of glorious colored birds which would perch on their hands and arms and shoulders. And of course it came about in time that when animals and birds gathered about the lads, there was no more fighting between the wild creatures than there is between a puppy and a kitten that have been raised together. Growing up with the wild creatures, wrestling with them and racing with them, the boys grew strong and fleet of foot. They could scale a cliff to reach a condor's nest or climb a tree as swiftly as a monkey, and in the water they were as much at home as on the land. Down into the clear depths they would dive, down in the cool green lake waters, to bring up shells and bright stones, one boy striving with the other, laughing merrily the while. And sitting on the shore in the sunshine, they would often look across the lake to the faraway mountain, talking about the time when they would adventure there to see what could be seen.